Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Whole Wellness Mama Summit, where we're unlocking the healthiest, less stressed mom in you using strategies from various wellness experts. I'm Amy Nesbitt. I'm excited to talk about pelvic floor health and the importance of breathing with Jen Landry. She is a leader in functional fitness that specializes in pregnant, postpartum, and everyday women. And as a mother of two little girls and two pregnancies that left her feeling weak, broken, and in need of answers, she discovered this pregnancy and postpartum corrective exercise certification. And this changed how she looked at pregnancy, postpartum fitness, and female health in general. And it ignited a fire in her to help as many women as possible so they could avoid what she experienced. Thank you, Jen. She is the CEO and owner of Mom's Fit Life to fulfill that mission she has. And I'm one of those moms that, after giving birth naturally to two rather large boys, whenever I sneeze, jump, or even cough too much, I leak and have tried pelvic floor PT a number of times. Life should not be like this. And Jen and I first spoke and we agreed it's way too common, but it's not normal. So
Right.
I'm excited to make this a more common conversation about how we can make our bodies right again. Welcome, Jen.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
So, someone meeting you for the first time, I'd love for you to share your quick story of how you came to where you are now.
Yeah, so I've been a personal trainer since 2010, and that was well before I had either of my children. And along the way, you have to have your continuing education courses, and some of those I took were based on pregnancy. And I thought I knew it all. I was like, I got this. I can train pregnant women. They'll be great in my hands. When I get pregnant, it'll be perfect. And then I had my first child, and things did not go as planned. The pregnancy itself was really difficult for me. It made it very hard for me to even attempt to work out. I was sick for 40 weeks. Um, yeah, and it was really difficult to even like do the simplest things because I just didn't have the energy. And then I figured, okay, that's fine. Maybe I'm just not meant to work out during this pregnancy, but I'll have no problem bouncing back, which is one of my least favorite terms, but bouncing back essentially after she was born. And turns out that's not true either. I didn't have the tools I needed, only I didn't know it at the time. And it took a while to get back to a point where I felt like my previous self. But I did get there, and I was like, great, my second one will be a lot better. It wasn't.
Oh, no.
And actually, with my second one, that's when I started having some of the symptoms that you alluded to in the intro of I was leaking. So there was a time where I was in the grocery store and I laughed and I had pee running down my leg and I had to run to the bathroom. And I know I'm not
So
alone.
many of us can relate. Yes, so many of us.
Yeah. And my back pain was pretty bad and it got worse after she was born. And I was like, what? This is supposed to go away when the baby comes. And it was getting worse and it was debilitating. And, you mentioned that you have seen multiple pelvic floor PTs. Well, I did too, and it wasn't working. I wasn't getting answers. So, knowing that there are continuing education credits and other experts out there, I went on this search of like, I need to fix myself because other people can't fix me. It's not working. And so that's where I came across the certification, and it helped me almost immediately. Like, even as I was going through the program, I was seeing results. I was seeing the effects of like some of the breathing work and the pelvic floor work and looking at it as a whole body. And I think sometimes that's where the PT kind of fails a little bit, is they are just looking at your pelvic floor. And so when I started to look at like how my body was working as a unit, I realized, oh, there's more to it than just the pelvic floor, or just, you go to a PT for a shoulder injury and they're just going to work on that one shoulder. Well, 6 months later, you might be back in the same boat because they weren't addressing the other things. And there's nothing wrong with PT. I'm not saying that. There's definitely a place for it, but I want to be the bridge that takes you from, okay, you've learned all this great information at PT, and then how do we progress you to life, to lifting your kids, to continuing to maintain the work you did in that pelvic floor PT, because I saw such a difference in myself. And I know, like you said, so many women can relate. So, like, let's fix it. Let's make it so it's not a common thing anymore.
So that I'm just going to go on off a little tangent because I just had a kind of similar conversation with a coworker who went in with a shoulder thing, saw one person, but then another person that he saw just talked about breathing and said, "You're breathing wrong." And he went on this complete like rabbit hole looking at breathing because she had mentioned a book. This PT had mentioned a book. Um, it's by James. I can't remember his name. It's called Breath, I think. Anyway,
Yeah.
and so now we talk about breathing all the time. And I know I took like a course. It was a virtual course, but it was all about breathing. And I was like, I am breathing wrong. And anyway, we'll dive into more of it. But it was amazing when I started learning, like, how does this happen when I've known how to breathe since I was born, right? But
Right.
yeah. So,
Yes.
okay, now I'm coming back. Let's start with something I mentioned in the intro that is, and you just mentioned it too, right? It's this leaking. Can we talk about why and what the heck we can start doing to help our pelvic floor? Tell us, please, that there is hope. I know you already did right now, but please tell us there's an easy way to fix this.
And that's where, the pelvic floor PT can be really helpful is, so I always recommend to clients that they should at least see a pelvic floor PT for one session, at least. Usually it's two because the first session is kind of a get to know you, but at least that first, so you can get an assessment, because the leaking can be for a couple different reasons. The first is that you might have an overly tight pelvic floor. And that can be like, picture the person who's doing thousands of Kegels every day. All they're doing is tightening and tightening and tightening that pelvic floor. But you might also have a really weak pelvic floor. And that could lead to leaking. But I can't assess that. The only way that you would know that is if you saw a pelvic floor PT. So that's why I always recommend at least one session. I know some people have to pay out of pocket for that, which is ridiculous, but that's why I say at least get that assessment so that like I can then take that information and go, okay, if it's a weak pelvic floor, these are the exercises we need to work on. If it's overly tightened, then this is what we're focusing on. And so it can be a couple different things. And then there's kind of like the whole body system working together as well can also factor into the leaking. So it just depends on the person, but it is a solvable problem if you know what to look for. And now, even that's not to say that you can't come see me and get help without the pelvic floor PT, because I can start to put you through exercises and almost immediately you're going to notice a difference. Are you leaking less? Are you leaking more? Okay, we're on the right track. Okay, let's switch directions. Let's see. And then there's also usually going to be some other symptoms that I can see in an assessment or that you can tell me about. So, I had back pain. Okay, so then I'm going to think maybe my core wasn't as strong as it needed to be. And that's going to play a role in, maybe having a tight pelvic floor because I'm trying to get tension and stability from somewhere else. So, I can help you assess what else is going on. We can immediately see results. It's just like, any muscle. If you have a tight muscle, let's work it out. Let's stretch it or foam roll it or, try and let it go, try and get it to relax. Or if you have a weak muscle, let's strengthen it, and you're gonna see quick results. So it can be solved.
I appreciate you saying that. And I will admit that a lot of mine, I actually have seen like a pelvic floor PT or even like a standard PT that has experience in pelvic floor work, and it gets better, right? But mine is mild enough that it gets a little better and then I get lax. Right? So like we said, it is a muscle to be trained, or like you said, it's a muscle to be trained. And if you stop,
Well,
then yeah.
and that is also great information to have, because it
Mm.
could be that you could do all the exercises that those PTs gave you till you're blue in the face, but if you are not breathing right or you're standing a certain way, unless you fix those issues, then it is going to keep repeating. And so I think that's also where moms get so frustrated, and where I got so frustrated is, they could help me loosen up my back pain, but nobody was telling me that my deep core sucked,
Yeah.
And so until I worked on my deep core, the back pain kept coming back. And so, there is an element too where it can be extremely frustrating. And you're like, well, screw it. I'm just going to leak for the rest of my life. Give me the period underwear, because
Yeah.
it's not worth it. But if we look at it as a full body approach, then we can address, why is it coming back all the time?
And that's such a good point, because I've been someone that likes to be active, does different things, and I'm like, I have a strong core. Like, I can do these things. I can do push-ups. I can do stuff. But when, the PT said, okay, engage your core, I'm like, I am engaging my core. It's a
Right.
different, it's just different. And it is fascinating for me to learn all these different things. So
Yes. And yeah, it's you got to be willing to take the time to learn your body.
and another fascinating thing, I know you kind of mentioned this, is all the things that we do on a regular basis that could be screwing up what we're trying to fix, right? Because I know during pregnancy, our bodies obviously change. We carry ourselves differently. We have to do things differently. And we do that for 9 months, with a baby in our
Right.
belly, some people multiple. And we have to relearn some of these things that we used to do naturally as a kid or even as a young adult, right? The way we breathe, our posture is horrible. I work in front of a computer all the time. My posture is horrible, right? Um, and a lot of things that we do on a regular basis. So we don't, like we said, mess it up by, doing these things wrong, and they're functional things. Uh, can we talk about that a little bit? Because we might not think about, how do you empty the dishwasher? How do
Right.
you carry your child? I totally carried my child with my hip out, and that's terrible, right? Or even how we stand up from our chair every single time.
Right.
So can we talk about some of those and what you've seen in people?
Yes, absolutely. And I love what you just said about the pregnancy. We carry this baby for 9 months or 40 weeks, and it grows. And that in the strength world is progressive training. So that baby is getting bigger. The load is getting bigger. Your belly is coming forward in a bigger fashion. And so you are getting into those bad patterns the way that you're supposed to progressively train. You are increasing your load, you are increasing your time under tension, but we are not doing it in the proper way. And then a lot of the things that we do as moms, like breastfeeding,
Mhm.
or like you said, holding your kid on your hip, exacerbate what we just did for 40 weeks. So you are now continuing the progressive overload. You're increasing that time under tension. And so, yeah, like the number one thing for breastfeeding is to make sure that you're bringing baby to boob. You're not hunching over. So lots of pillows. Have pillows behind your back, have pillows at your lower back, have pillows under your arms, whatever it takes, but bring baby to boob and sit tall. Think about, I like to think about like your rib cage as an upside down bowl and your pelvis as a right side up bowl, and the rims of the bowls should align. So if one is tilted in any direction, you're not stacked in a good position. And so when you're breastfeeding, you want that stack. If you're sitting at a computer, you want that stack. You don't want to be, rounded or leaning. So use supports. It's okay. And I think a lot of people are afraid of supports, or, even in exercise, it makes you feel like, oh, I'm being babied, or, this is such a weak exercise if I have to have a support. No, they can be really beneficial, and making sure when you're putting baby in the crib or loading the dishwasher, that you're not rounding. So again, think about those bowls, and when you push your hips back to reach down, you're keeping those bowls in alignment. It might be vertical, might be horizontal in whatever you're doing, but they should be aligned. They should not be rounding towards each other. So your back should not be rounded, and those are things that can put a lot of pressure on the pelvic floor. They are a lot of things that can create a lot of back pain. And so making sure that you keep that stack all the time, so same thing in a crib, use a step stool if you need to. Put, step up on the step stool so you can reach over the railing without rounding over the railing. It's okay. Sit baby up first and then grab so that they're higher. Loading the dishwasher, you can kneel if you have to, if that makes it easier, but make sure you're not rounding over. Even washing the dishes before you put them in the dishwasher, you can open the cabinet underneath and put one foot up. Simple things that can be done if you just pay a little bit of attention to how those ribs and your hips are stacked.
I just sat up straighter because I was totally rounding. But even the twisting, right? Because when we do laundry or dishwasher or whatever it is, you just don't even think about it. I don't engage my core. I used to not engage my core and just do the things, right? But we'll get into diastasis later. I'm kind of jumping the gun on myself, but right, as someone that has a mild diastasis, it's just things that are exacerbating, like you said, the problem that is there. So things to be conscious of when we have the daily activities that get done over and over and over, right?
And I'll say too that it's also gets frustrating and intimidating almost for women because you're told not to lift more than 10 pounds for a while. And I mean, come on, really? Like, what in your world is lighter than 10 pounds, period? Like, it's a ridiculous piece of advice, but it's so frustrating. And women are like, I can't do it. I'm not supposed to. And like, but really, your kid, the carrier, your stroller, like, you're not carrying around a 1 pound stroller, so like, even though the doctor said don't lift more than 10 pounds, you're going to have to. So learning how to do it appropriately and with the right tension in the right places can really make a massive difference in how you feel.
I also liked how you mentioned earlier about Kegels, because some are like, yeah, just do your Kegels, just do your Kegels. And some say, no, Kegels are the worst. But what you were mentioning is that it depends, right? It depends on who you are and how your body is. So I appreciated that you mentioned that. And then also breathing. I want to go back to this because it's kind of a big thing, right? I know breathing into my back and my sides were a very hard thing for me. I know it's kind of a big conversation to talk about breathing, and you go over it in your course and your time with people specifically. But can you just briefly tell us what people are normally doing wrong when they breathe and things that can help fix that?
Yeah, and this kind of ties into the Kegels too. So both with breathing and with Kegels, it's less about just breathing or just doing the Kegel. It's about thinking about both of those things as a unit of muscles or a muscle, where with like, a bicep curl, for example, if you're, here all the time and you're just doing this, there's never going to be any growth. You need to go through that full range of motion. You need to have the ability at your elbow to open and close. You need to have that muscle go through that full range. So your pelvic floor also needs to do that. Your rib cage also needs to do that. Your diaphragm also needs to do that. And that's where the Kegels can depend. So if you're somebody who's really tight all the time, you're essentially here all the time with your pelvic floor. You need to learn how to relax and let the pelvic floor come down. And that's where breathing can be very helpful for some in the relaxation of the pelvic floor. So those are people who should not be doing Kegels. Now, if you have a weak pelvic floor, you're somebody who's out here all the time and you cannot curl to save your life. It is constantly just here. And you're going to use the breathing to help contract the pelvic floor. And those are people who maybe a Kegel is not a bad idea. But in general, really, I like to say everybody needs to stop thinking about it like Kegels, period. And you're just thinking about it as a contraction and a relaxation of the muscle. It's, I wish we could get rid of that name completely and just talk about it that way. And it would make things so much easier. But what happens is your body, you have your diaphragm and your pelvic floor, and everything in between holds a lot of pressure and tension. And so when you inhale, you need to let the diaphragm, which we all know flattens out on an inhale, but your pelvic floor needs to match. It needs to also relax and flatten out with an inhale. And then the pressure in your canister can stay the same. And then as you exhale, that diaphragm pushes the air up and contracts. Your pelvic floor also needs to contract and lift. So a lot of people just breathe here. This is shallow breathing. So they're not pairing their pelvic floor with their diaphragm. It is just their diaphragm, and it's probably doing this. It's not even flattening very much. So it's not even getting its full range of motion. So if you're here when you breathe, if you can see your shoulders, when you're probably shallow breathing. If your belly is coming way out, it's all belly breathing. And that's going to make something like a diastasis worse. That's going to make prolapse or leaking worse because you're putting too much pressure down on the pelvic floor and out onto the belly. So really, those are kind of the two that you really see that most postpartum women will have, is the shallow breathing pattern or the belly breathing pattern. But what we want is we want a big exhale that lifts from the pelvic floor. Then your core tightens, like your corset muscles, like you're tying up that corset. And then your belly button kind of scoops up and in, and your ribs come down a little bit. And that should be a full exhale. And then as you inhale, you want to feel it into your ribs, into the front, into the back. You might get a little belly. That's okay, as long as you're getting everything else to expand as well. So thinking about it like, and as you give that audible exhale, you're lifting your pelvic floor, you're tying the corset, belly button scoops back and up, ribs come down, and then kind of reverse it. You want to think about breathing into your rib cage so you can put your hands on your ribs. See if it expands into your hands without your shoulders lifting. And then try and think about your pelvis like a balloon that you're filling, and you're relaxing that pelvic floor. You can feel that relaxation in your pelvic floor. And then you can feel it tighten when you go to exhale. And so really making sure that you're not lifting your shoulders, so if you have a lot of neck tension or upper back tension, you might be, because if you sit here and you just shrug, you can feel those muscles work. So if you're breathing that way, you're going to feel all that tension. You're going to be in a lot of pain all the time up here. If you're belly breathing, you might have a lot of back pain. Those are kinds of cues that maybe your body isn't inhaling and exhaling as a unit the way it's supposed to.
That was some good deep breaths that I was able to do. And it's always kind of hard. I'm like, am I, like to assess, but I remember I wasn't breathing into my back or my side. So in the morning, I like to kind of kneel over, scrunch up, I guess, and then hold on to like my bedpost and just do a few breaths into my back. It's kind of part of my morning thing that I do. But little things to help my breathing. And go back to breathing the way that we were supposed to, right?
Yeah, and there's some ways too that make it really easy to tell if you're breathing into your back. Just, you can lie on the floor and take a few of the breaths, like I talked about, lifting the pelvic floor, tightening core, stuff like that, and use the feedback from the floor. When you inhale, do you feel more pressure on the floor? Do you only feel it on your right side? Do you only feel it on your left side? Maybe you only feel it in your lower back. Can you expand at the rib cage versus the lower back? So you can feel it on the floor. You can also film yourself in different positions, sitting, lying down. You can have the tabletop position where your hands and knees, and film yourself. See if you can see the expansion. Filming yourself is always my number one. For exercises, anything, breathing, film yourself. It is the worst and best window to the world of what's actually happening in your body.
A lot of people might say, I don't want to, but face your fears. You're absolutely right.
You don't have to show it to
exactly,
anybody.
Exactly. Yeah.
Just do it.
Yeah. So, okay, actually, I want to touch on one thing because you mentioned there's all these different positions, right? The floor is the easiest, right? Like if you're starting out, and it really, you do notice a difference and you kind of progress from there. Right?
Yeah, I will say there's one exception to that. Is if you had a traumatic birth, and most are traumatic, but some people can kind of move past the trauma or what happens in our bodies based on trauma. So for some, it might actually be really difficult if you birthed on your back to breathe normally on your back because you're fighting that trauma response. So if you're finding it really difficult to breathe on your back, even though it should be relatively easy, then try something else like hands and knees, or like your squat, for example, because that takes you out of that trauma position. And you might get a good idea of like, okay, I can breathe on hands and knees, but I can't breathe on my back. Well, maybe there's a trauma response happening there, because pregnancy and birth is traumatic to the body. It just depends on how well you can bounce back from trauma.
Thank you for that caveat. Okay, I mentioned this earlier, and maybe I'm not saying it correctly. Is it diastasis? I always just said diastasis, kind of like other, anyway, but diastasis recti, because like I mentioned earlier, I do have a mild case, but it's been mild enough that I just kind of live with it and do these other corrective things. Can you share what it is and what moms can do with that?
Yes. So, you can say, I think different people say it different ways, and it's all the same. So a diastasis is, every single pregnant person is going to have a diastasis at some point, especially in the later stages of pregnancy. And it is just kind of, how does your body react postpartum and recover from it postpartum? What it is you think about the six-pack muscles, and there's a clear line between your six-pack muscles. Well, there is a tissue there called your linea alba, and it separates the two sides of your six-pack to enable room for baby. And some women are lucky enough that the day they give birth, it goes right back to normal and you never knew it existed. That is not most women. Right. I had a horrible one, especially after my second. The key with diastasis, and I'm hesitating to use the word heal or recover, because it can be functional and still not be what is defined as healed. So what I mean by that is, and I have a way to self-test for a diastasis, and you use your fingers, you lay down, you do a little slight crunch, and you can feel, does it go down past your knuckles? Can you use one finger? Is it four fingers? What is that depth and that width? And a lot of times people will think like, okay, I still have width. Great, but do you have depth? No, I don't. Okay, well then you have a functional diastasis and there's nothing wrong with it. Now, if it is still four fingers wide and four fingers deep, then it's still a problem and it's not functional or healed. If you look up the definition of what is healed, they will say, no more than 2 fingers wide, no more than 1 knuckle deep. But really, if you can create enough tension with your core that you don't get any depth, regardless of how wide it is a functional working diastasis that can help still support you in that exercise. And then what you'll find too for a lot of women is they might be able to do certain exercises with no issues. They don't get any separation, they don't get any depth, but then they go to something else that's a little more challenging and suddenly their diastasis shows up again. And so that's what I mean by functional is in the moment, depending on what you're doing, is it there or is it not? And is that depth? Are you able to create tension across that linea alba, which means your core is engaged for the movement you're doing? And so a lot of times I'll recommend to women like, okay, test it right away, see where you're at, go through some of the breathing exercises, the core work, which is all stuff you can do before you're cleared at 6 weeks. Test yourself at 6 weeks. Has it improved? Can you truly be cleared? Then as you're ready to move on to harder exercises or your kids are getting bigger, test again. Where is it at? You can test yourself during an exercise. If you're in plank, go ahead, feel it. Can you keep tension in that plank? Maybe it's better to have a spouse learn how to tell so that when you're in plank, they can test for you or something.
I was just thinking that. I was like, that's a one-handed plank there.
Yeah. And then it might change because you go to one hand. But if you can test in certain movements and certain patterns, like, okay, this is working for me, but this isn't yet. And so it's functional versus healed. And so it's just that separation between your six-pack muscles, and it's just how much tension can you create and maintain.
Yeah, I know as I was doing better at contracting and all those things, right? And I wanted to jump back into, oh yeah, I can do crunches again, I can do planks again. But those are some of the biggest things where we kind of have to beware, right, of how we move and how we potentially could impact that if we're not doing it right. Not to say we can't ever get there again, but just things to be aware of. Anything else people?
Well, I was going to say with the crunches and stuff, you're going to hear a lot of people say you cannot do crunches. That's a load of crap. But like you said, you have to work towards it. It's not something that you can do right away. You have to be able to create and generate that tension. And I mean, you think about how many times a day you pick up toys or your kids, and essentially you're in that rounded crunching position. Can you get to that point again? So there's never an exercise that you cannot do ever. It's just, can you do it right now? And can you perform it well right now? So I think that's also intimidating for women is there's so many like, don't do this, stop doing this. And it's like, okay, maybe right now, but not forever.
Yeah. And there's the hope there, right? That it is just a not right now, or just do it a little easier. I know you mentioned this earlier. We feel like we're cheating or we feel like we're not going as hard at the exercises, but if we're not doing it right, it doesn't make sense anyway. You're actually hurting your body. And like you also just said, there are so many of these same movements in our daily activities that if we're not doing it right in exercise, we're probably definitely not doing it right in those everyday things that we keep doing over and over.
Right.
So I'd love to leave our moms with a quick challenge that they can perform today to start making some of these changes in their daily lives, and they can come back and ask us questions, let us know how it went, all those kinds of things. Can you share your challenge today?
Yes, I'm going to ask everybody to film themselves. But lay down on the floor with your knees bent, feet on the floor, and practice that big full inhale and exhale. Film yourself from the side. So you lay down, you're going to think about just trying to relax everything. If you feel a major arch in your lower back, try and figure out if your pelvis might be tilting one way or the other, or maybe your rib cage. Remember those bowls, line them up. And then I want you to think about big full inhale. Try and draw that inhale into the floor, into your armpits, and then exhale audibly, like think about lifting the pelvic floor, tying those corset muscles, scooping that belly up and in, and then bringing those ribs down. Do that 5 or 6 times. And I want you to exhale until you cough. So you're going to go, okay, and then take your next full inhale. And what I want you to look for is in the film, in the video, do your shoulders lift? Do you lose your neck in the video? Because I want you to film from the side. So does your neck disappear? Okay. Do you round your shoulders at the end of the exhale to get that exhale, those ribs down? Does your belly actually wind up pooching at the bottom? Do your lower abs actually kind of stick out instead of, when you get a good exhale, everything, you should shrink your waist. Everything between your hips and your boobs essentially should shrink. If anything is popping out, we're not engaging the core all the way on that exhale. And really trying to, and you can watch yourself. So if your camera's here, you can watch yourself or put yourself in front of a mirror and try and play around with trying to get those abs to come down and in instead of pooching out. Test the diastases if, during different parts of your exhale, and just watch yourself. Give yourself 5 or 6 deep breaths. Look at it. If your shoulders are coming up, we're not breathing enough down. Can you feel your pelvic floor relax and contract? Or are you like not connected to your pelvic floor at all? Which is also very possible. Sometimes we just got to get that connection and then all of a sudden things start working. So really just practicing that deep breathing. And it's great because it's also relaxing. It taps into that parasympathetic nervous system and calms you down. So it's a great excuse when your kids are driving you crazy. Hey, I got to go take some breaths, and just practice that and film yourself and see if you can get better at it.
And to test like if your core is working correctly, you can kind of touch, like I'm touching, you can't see, but like the hip bone, like right inside the hip bone, kind of going into your pelvis, right?
Yep. So you find those bumps on your hips, the protrusions, if, and then you're going to bring your fingers down and in a little bit closer to like what would be called your groin, or what people think of when you say groin. And you can press into that a little bit. And then as you exhale, you should feel the tension under your fingers. If it stays soft and squishy, then we're not getting those lower abs on board. So that is another feedback way you can do it. You can also put your thumb on the bottom of your rib cage and your fingers on that bony protrusion of your hips, and they should not move. So if your thumbs are like coming way up and then your thumbs are coming way down, then you're doing too much on your rib cage. Or you're tilting your pelvis if your fingers are moving a lot. So there are some ways you can tell. The visual repetition of filming is a lot better, I think, just because you don't have to think about the physical cues. But for some, yeah, you're right. That does help to have that tactical feedback as well.
I just remember that, as they were assessing me and I was going, I am. They're like, feel right here.
So, right. It's still soft and squishy.
Yeah.
You're not. Yeah.
Yeah. But there's hope, mamas. I have now figured out how to do that. So you can too.
And again, try different positions. If laying down, you're not getting anywhere, maybe you try hands and knees, and then maybe you can do it there. See what that feels like. You then know what to try and do, and then go back to your back and try it there and see if you can replicate that feeling. So that you can switch it up a little bit too. Perfect.
So I know you have a free gift for everyone. Can you share what it is and how people can connect with you further?
Yes. So it is a posture reset workout. So it's basically 6 different exercises across the body that kind of really hit on what is the weakest for women after having a baby. and it's not, everybody is not always weak in these areas, but in general, they are the exercises that most postpartum women need postpartum, because they're the muscles that shut down while we're pregnant or just change enough that we've got to get back to it. So it's a really great like full body exploration of what did I lose during pregnancy? What do I need to work on coming back? And a lot of it I go over like on my Instagram. I have a Facebook group as well, that has all of this, and you can get the posture guide from my website. And we go in more depth with some of these exercises, and even some of what we talked about earlier of like how to load a dishwasher. You can find a lot of that like on my Instagram, or I go over it in the Facebook group a lot too.
Just want to say, because we've been talking about like postpartum and things that you shouldn't be doing right after birth and all that, but really it's something that anybody, no matter how long ago you had birth, can do, right? Because I know I didn't do this all right after birth because the US does not do pelvic floor stuff as part of normal routine. But just wanted to make sure that this is not exclusive to
Right.
people that have just had babies.
You can be 40 years postpartum and still have helpful results from a lot of these movements and exercises. And there's a lot of women who don't know that they had issues until they're 40 years postpartum. So they're now needing the help, and it is totally going to help you. And then, yes, anybody postpartum, doesn't matter how long it's been, you can get help.
Perfect. And I know you were throwing in an awesome additional bonus for those that upgrade for the All Access Pass. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, it's my core program, Fit Foundations Core. It is more than just ab workouts. There we go over some breathing things. There's some supplemental exercises that pair nicely with the core workouts and all combine to help kind of go over everything we kind of touched on today. How to get more mobility and movement in your rib cage, how to get your whole trunk to work as a unit, and what to do if you have back pain, stuff like that. So yeah, you'll get that core program with ab workouts that you can add to workouts you're already doing, and then some stuff to do in addition to your standard core workout.
Perfect. Anything else you want to add for our mamas before we wrap up?
No, I mean, the biggest thing, we did kind of touch on it a little bit, is please remember that it is okay to use things like props or to regress an exercise. So for example, push-ups. I am actually only doing elevated push-ups right now. I am not doing any from the floor because my form, elevated, which is an easier push-up, is not perfect. It is not. I still have some weaknesses that I need to work through. So I should not be doing any from the floor yet. So it is okay and sometimes necessary to build the strength at that quote easy exercise or with the props first and nail it, be absolutely perfect before you progress. So don't be afraid to go slow. Don't be afraid to start with just breathing. It seems ridiculous, but it can be intense. And don't fear the easy just because society is like, oh, you're only breathing. No, you're really breathing and it is hard work. So don't be afraid to do the easy thing, use the props. Don't be afraid to backtrack a little every once in a while and just check in even. Use it as a check-in. Hey, does my form still look good in elevated push-ups, even though I'm on to floor push-ups? Use it as a way to guide yourself and take the time to build the foundation first.
I love that. That's such a great reminder. Thank you. Well, with that, thank you, Jen, for sharing this information, because I want to reiterate again, this is way too common and we shouldn't just have to live with it. So everyone, ask your questions, grab those freebies, tell us how the challenge went. You don't have to share your video so you can tell us how it went, and we will see you back for more Summit speakers.
Thank you so much.